afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. You know the saying about being the last panel before a meal, before lunch, so want to get started right away, make some brief introductions. It's a blessing in this part of the world when we have the rain coming down the way it is, so I think that's a very auspicious note to start on with this panel at the moment. We're meant to discuss today partnerships in the broader GCC. We're both meant to talk about challenges and barriers to better partnerships. Can we afford an AMROC-type organization in each country whose business model is to focus on regional MRO, or should we be looking for synergies and ways to build and bolster cooperation in the region for the future? On the panel today, we have three very distinguished guests: Bill Wood, President of Aerospace Materials from Cytec Solvay Group; Colin Mahoney, Senior Vice President, International and Service Solutions for Rockwell Collins; and Dr. Hamid Mogul, Director of Global Manufacturing for Rolls-Royce Group. I'd like to build a little bit on the last panel conversation and get started right away in talking about the regional market and how you build an ecosystem across countries. And in that regard, I'd like to ask Bill to say a few words from his perspective about elements for developing a regional market ecosystem. What are some of the positive elements from your experience, from your company's experience, and even if you want to say a few of the words about the barriers that you faced and how to break some of those down.
Certainly, thank you, Danny. I've spent my career in the development and supply of composite materials, and as you might guess by looking, that career has spanned a few decades, and I've been fortunate to be a part of early on the ecosystem development in a few different regions around composite materials and their use in primarily aerospace applications. So I'll share my thoughts in the context of the aerospace industry that is technologically intense, relatively highly regulated, and operates over fairly long business and life cycles. And that last one in particular, I think, plays heavily into what constitutes a good partnership and the ability to build an ecosystem. We heard yesterday from a number of the speakers certain aspects of the partner relationship that are important in building an ecosystem in a new region. Certainly the shared vision and the clarity of the end game, the commitment and the staying power, the long-term staying power, because again, long business cycles in this industry, and finally the trust that will necessarily be drawn upon to bridge the gaps of even a very effective governance system between partners. I think we also all understand the importance of really being able to capitalize on the complementary strengths of the partners and the capacities of the region to create a differentiated value for the end customers or for the market. Finally, an area that in my own experience has been really key to successful partnerships, but maybe we don't talk about as much, is this energy that gets built when you are setting out to create something where nothing exists, and the entrepreneurial behaviors and spirit that sometimes even maybe more normally, can I say, pensive companies or methodical companies will employ. And we can move faster, we can be more creative, we can, and frankly, we can grow and have a lot of fun. And that has certainly been our experience in the last few years as we've worked here in Abu Dhabi, and in particular with our partner Mubadala in the use of composite materials. Thank you.
Thank you. Colin, we heard from the previous panel, Raytheon's been here 40, 50 years, had successful partnerships on the ground. From Rockwell Collins' perspective, you have a number of successful partnerships in the region. Can you talk about some of the attributes of what have made those projects or those partnerships successful, if you will, and how you're driving future collaboration across borders in the GCC?
Yeah, the word partner is, we all know what that means. It's one of the most simple terms, and when we take it in our home lives, and most of us have partners at home. So we know what that means in that context. So why does it become so often difficult in business? So our approach is really a sequential one. And I think if you listened to Kelly earlier, the first battle is creating the mindset within the company of passionately getting your shoulder behind international growth. You know, human beings are all the same. Once they understand the value of something, they generally get enthused and excited about accomplishing something special. So in forming our international organisation, that's what we attempt to do. And our job is to keep the passion in front of our 20,000 employees for what could be accomplished in a special way. So once you have that foundational mindset, I think the next thing is insight, being part of the fabric of aviation in these countries which we've not historically been in. Allows us to, again, keep that communication flow going. There was a time as recent as in the last 5 to 10 years where our assets trying to develop business internationally were based in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. And as we've come to find, that wasn't the most efficient way of doing things. I would say the third thing as it relates to really cracking the code on partnerships is having a value proposition for the partner, which obviously entails a sharing environment. If we expect to come into regions such as the GCC and extract value for us without having a value proposition for Robert Collins, our success will be short-lived. So I think what you saw us do and announce at IDEX around our intent with AMROC in the MRO space, and not just inside the UAE, but to take what we believe will be a best-in-class capability and export that to regions beyond the GCC, to areas in Asia and Africa, because it's best in class. And that's a real example of two entities coming together to create mutually beneficial value. And if you get that right, then these partnerships can work.
Thank you. Dr. Mogul, you're an expert on manufacturing for the future, and Rolls-Royce has been very successful in the region. I think it would be fair to say Rolls-Royce is on the cusp of some very big announcements and successes in the near future in the region. Can you talk a little bit about some of the challenges, not only in the UAE, but across borders in the GCC, and what some of your secret sauce for success will be as you move forward, as Rolls-Royce as a company moves forward in the manufacturing sector in aerospace in the GCC?
Good afternoon. Assalamu alaikum. If I could answer this question in sort of two specific themes. Number one, the kind of partnerships, manufacturing partnerships, which I think, in my opinion, are the foundation for long-term sustained success in manufacturing in regions like the GCC. And secondly, then our involvement in those. I consider three kind of partnerships in manufacturing. I think these are distinct, interlinked, but very distinct in their own right. Yeah. And to me, there's an order of play as well. For example, the first partnership would be in manufacturing a variety of aerospace components and sub-assemblies, engine components, structures, aircraft components, sub-assemblies. And the reason is very, very simple. Even if they are methods developed by OEMs, it doesn't matter. The reason why creating a bedrock of manufacturing facilities producing aerospace components is because we all know here aerospace is pretty unique. The requirements of manufacturing assembly are driven largely by product safety requirements, and there are some very, very stringent regulatory and process controls to ensure that the manufacturing operation has the highest product safety and integrity. And therefore, the DNA of manufacturing and assembly takes a while to establish. Some of these have been developed over decades by the OEMs in the West, and therefore it's not easy to grasp that at day-to-day level. So learning the day-to-day operating disciplines of aerospace and ensuring that that encompasses parts, of different varieties, components of different materials and structures and assemblies is absolutely the foundation for me and that needs to be done as a base. That's the first one. The second one would be the advanced manufacturing capabilities, which is the researching into advanced manufacturing using local universities, OEMs, collaborative environment. So having a base of manufacturing and assembly, but then researching into innovative technologies and methods, for example, adaptive closed loop controls, automation aspects which reduce cost, improve productivity, and then bringing those innovations to the manufacturing base. That involves universities big time, and there has to be a collaborative environment. The third one, which I think is absolutely serious and perhaps doesn't get spoken about often enough, we are at the threshold of something very, very significant in manufacturing. The whole aspects of cyber physical systems, global interconnectivity, data analytics, and all of that cloud computing in the next few years will create a kind of competence which will be transformational for aerospace manufacturing. It transcends sectors, so it will cover the sectors too. But we are not that far away from it. We are approaching it, and there's a global race to get the standards and be upfront and making sure people are ahead of the pack. So whoever gets there first will have the standards and the IPR and have transformational capabilities. And I absolutely believe that we will be able to make fault-free manufacture, where inspection and rework become yesterday's norm, no concessions. So that is a different kind of relationship, different kind of partnership. You don't need a base for that. What you need is OEMs, advanced manufacturing institutes across the globe, and those capability providers that can help generate those answers before they become ingrained in the manufacturing aerospace, and therefore we lose, we get locked out. So 3 distinct partnerships, all connected together, and I would see them under an overarching strategy which takes account of each one of them, and the relationships across these ensures that all of them are done in some kind of order and a magnitude that is necessary. I can answer the Rolls-Royce question later on if you wish, because I've taken a bit too much time.
Okay, no worries. We'll come back to that when we talk about successes and failures, if you don't mind. Bill, the Saudis, as we heard in the previous brief, have been working in the aerospace sector now for many years. The UAE has as well. Other countries in the Gulf are starting to do more and more. How do we create the ecosystem? How do we encourage the next round, if you will, of early adopters? How do we create the space that gets the next generation involved here, and the next folks that want to invest money and invest time and research and talent into improving the aerospace sector and moving it forward, from your perspective?
Well, I do think, in addition to all of the concepts that we've discussed yesterday and today about what constitutes a high-value, good-quality partnership in creating a new ecosystem, I do think getting that activation energy to get some early adopters to step in with assertiveness does require a few additional special types of elements. And the one that's on my mind, and maybe this is most relevant to, say, the composite materials industry, where there is a heavy aspect of technology or materials development followed by qualification and all. And I would say one of the real drivers that I've seen lead to success, and I'm seeing it here in this region with some work we're doing, is a very concrete foundational project to build the work and at least some key aspects of the ecosystem around. Foundational project meaning that it is of sufficient critical mass that upon, and clear enough when it's done, that it does become the basis from which other things then, with maybe a little less investment and a little lower activation energy, can then be built. And I would say, in addition to having critical mass, that foundational project needs to have, because of the inherent risks of being an early adopter, it needs to have the right investment risk-return benefits for all the partners. I think it really does need to draw on the unique complementary strengths and capabilities of the partners, and ultimately it needs to either, our experience has been either expand the market or do something of enough value to the customers that there really is a pull. And with that, between partners and end customers, I think that usually gets the ball rolling. And again, in several cases in our experience, that's been the case.
So Bill, in the past, the early adopter drive has come from the government, has come in these countries. Is that the model for the future, or are we seeing an evolution of where sectors and companies that have been created by the government and are now up in place for 10, 15, 20 years are going to be more and more the leaders for the future in partnership with their foreign counterparts from around the world?
Yeah, I guess I probably don't have the right background, John, or with respect to government being the initial driver for those types of things in new regions. Certainly the government support and the national strategy. But what we've seen, especially with civil aircraft, is it's really end customer driven. And when there's the growing demand, then there's the need for facilitization in country.
Okay, thank you. And Colin, I'm going to ask you a two-part question because I think they're actually very, very related. How does Rockwell manage the make-in-country procurement policies that some of the GCC countries have? And then related to that, managing the offset requirement? And is there synergy there when you're given a requirement that certain aspects of what you're selling or providing here must be made in country? Are the offset programs able to be flexible enough to help you and assist you in driving that forward in a successful way?
Yeah, so clearly we're all very aware of and understand the foundation of the make in whatever country strategies that exist. It's all about growing capability in those countries as we look to advance aerospace, defense, and engineering. I think the secret sauce to making that an ongoing and sustainable solution is making sure that those capabilities add value. If you think about one of the most famous, as we sit here today, is Make in India. Well, if we look at our India example as a benchmark for others, we've actually been able to create a capability in India, an engineering capability that performs now flawlessly, and in fact is accretive to our business and something we choose to use and do work in India compared to some of our US locations. So I think if we have the right mindset, again, mindset's very important around creating something that we can export and use and is sustainable on its own 2 feet. It's very important. Offsets, obviously those make-in-country strategies are often born from offset policies, and we use the term offset obligation routinely, and that's kind of a term I don't like very much. Obligation implies that thou shalt or you must do something. Now I think if we're going to be successful on either side of this equation, we've got to make sure that we look at the offset policies as a guideline to implement a country strategy and an environment that creates opportunity for companies to come into these countries and overachieve. So our philosophy in offsets is understand the strategy of the country and consequently overachieve in that area. And I think the UAE is a great example of a country using their offset policy to further their strategic intent, because really use that as a set of guidelines rather than a mandate. So if there's guidelines that we can talk about and we can create this 1 + 1 equals something greater than 2, I think both parties will grow from that, and that's a credible way of dealing with implementing strategies and ensuring that us as suppliers bring value to the countries that are trying to grow this capability.
And I think that's an important point about the UAE's new offset policy, which is now almost 5 or 6 years old, is that it is a guideline. It's a policy, but it's flexible, and it has flexibility built into it. And from my understanding and my perspective and experience, the companies that have come in early and talked about how to meet the requirement or the obligation, but doing it in a way that gets to best practices, gets to achieving a goal and objective of the country, and doing it with some flexibility, that flexibility exists in the system to do that.
Yeah, and that comes back to the notion of insight. You know, if you went back, maybe as recent as 5 years, now our insight into the UAE offset policy was a lot less than it is today. We now have people here, we now have infrastructure here that we're part of the community. We understand the strategic direction, and we're ready to shape our value proposition to the country and to entities within the country to make sure that we're creating a win-win.
Can you say the same about other countries in the GCC? Are they works in progress? Are they moving along a similar road?
Well, yeah, you're seeing a lot of variability from countries in the GCC that have eliminated offset policies to some that are right now redrafting offset policies. So you see variability. I just encourage us all to look at best practices and learn from those and use some of those foundations as we recreate those policies.
Dr. Mogul, can you talk a little bit about, I mean, I think you enunciated very well 3 areas for the future, but can you talk a little bit about challenges? We've talked about some successes. Can you talk a little bit more about some of the barriers, some of the challenges that companies might face in implementing some of the things that you've put on the table to be successful?
Yeah, to create, I think I wouldn't call them barriers, I call them opportunities. I pointed out 3 specific areas of long-term collaboration partnerships, each one of them significant in own right. So one request I would make is that they are treated as one. They're part of a wholesome strategy, and therefore a very, very long-term strategy. And sometimes there's a tendency to perhaps take individual projects in their own right and apply the normal financial appraisal systems. I honestly think when it comes to capability in the long term, then one has to deal with it in a much more strategic sense, and therefore create long-term relationships, even if the financial hurdles, the short-term ones, are perhaps not that attractive. The reason is very simple. Some of the aerospace methods and technologies and techniques and processes, even fares and layers, have taken decades to evolve, maybe 40, 50, 60 years to evolve, and they're priceless. So getting that across into a region, into the DNA of the aerospace manufacturing, embedding them into the operating mechanism, creating self-sustaining units that produce, make day-to-day decisions for themselves, and then spilling over the capital, human capital into universities is priceless and long-term. So therefore, long-term relationships with OEMs that transcends individual projects and creates these 3 kind of partnerships, in my opinion, absolutely essential. That's the first point. Second point is pace. When I go around, meeting other people across the globe, aerospace manufacturing is almost like today's most attractive proposition. It's like football. Everybody wants to play in it. So there's a global race taking place. Lots of regions across the world want to be aerospace supply chain. They want to get that capability. Pace is important. Decisions that could have been made yesterday do not need to be moved on today. Pace, capacity, capability, and long-term strategic alignment is absolutely essential. We're very lucky. We've had long-term relationships here. This region boasts some of the best airlines in the world. We have companies like Mubadala. We're currently working with them on very, very attractive long-term strategic framework, and hopefully very soon we will develop, we will announce some important developments. But that by itself will not create a thriving global aerospace value chain in GCC. A lot more needs to be done. Component level, assembly levels, structure levels, and therefore pace is absolutely vital, and long-term strategic outlook is vital.
So you touched on the Rolls-Royce sort of line and curve there. Say a little bit more, though, specifically about what you've done at Rolls-Royce to overcome some of these challenges in the future, and how you're gonna some of your strategy to overcome these challenges as Rolls-Royce rolls out some of these projects?
In UAE, for example, working with Badler, absolutely. I think we've got a very close relationship, and that relationship is helping us to define long-term strategic outlook. That is not a problem at all. My point was that that by itself will not create a thriving aerospace value chain here. An awful lot more needs to be done with multiple partners and number of bases. That's the first point. If I give examples of other places where we've been successful in the past, Singapore example, China, and we start with MRO facilities in Singapore, we developed component repair facilities, then moved into component manufacturing, then fan blade assembly, and our full engines, Trent engines over there. And that's been a progressive development over 10, 15 years or so. And that came because of long-term strategic partnership and a relationship that encompassed all these variety of aspects that I've just spoken about, and with some kind of a timeline and long-term development, and the region by itself, the country itself, had an outlook which was strategic and long-term. So I think we will bring that kind of experience to UAE and GCC as well, because we will learn from that. And similarly, other countries are attempting to capture similar kind of framework. But I have to stress again that there is a lot of competition outside, and literally every continent is attempting very hard to create manufacturing capabilities, and therefore I would urge that we do it at a faster pace. And I would like to bring the key element of the future of manufacturing just once more again. Manufacturing has evolved in the last 30, 40 years gradually. Better materials, better processes, better controls, less waste. However, in the next 10, 15 years, there'll be a radical transformation in manufacturing. It doesn't matter what sector you belong to. The integration of data analytics and the cyber physical systems with advanced intelligence and intelligent automation will create competencies and capabilities which are unheard of. And they will, wherever those are implemented, the competitive advantage will be unbelievably unique. That's a mouth-watering prospect. But that won't happen unless there's an indigenous value chain created, operating. The DNA of the aerospace manufacturing is well understood, embedded, human capitalism ready to grasp the next letter. So the stage one is absolutely vital. Let's get that going so that we can aspire for this wonderful transformation that's coming our way in the next 10, 15 years.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because I just want to remind the audience that Abu Dhabi has announced that it will host its first ever global manufacturing summit in October, 10 to 12 October, I believe are the dates. And this will be an incredible step forward in thought leadership on sustainable manufacturing for the future. And it will be a summit of global leaders in manufacturing, talking from not just the aerospace sector, talking about all the key sectors on how to go to the next wave of manufacturing and integrate the things that you're talking about. Very, very important thought leadership on the part of the UAE and the GCC in general. With that, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to open it up for a couple of questions. We have about 8 minutes left. There's someone in the audience who's a colleague and a friend and works for the U.S. government, but has worked in a number of GCC countries as a senior commercial officer. And I want to throw the first question to him, Dao Lei, from the U.S. Embassy in Abu Dhabi, to have the opportunity to ask the panelists from his perspective about GCC partnerships, something that he might want to raise. Dao is up here. If there's a mic floating around, up here in the middle. Sorry to point.
Thanks, Annie. Can you hear me? Yeah. I've been around the region for about 10 years and I served in 4 markets. And one of the things that we've observed now is that with this new paradigm shift, the PPP model is here to stay. The buy-sell model's gone. And you've all touched on that in your own way, that you're full partners. But I'd be interested in hearing what core advice would you offer to people outside the aerospace sector, defense sector, that you think would make them more successful not just within UAE, but the Gulf.
Each want to take a quick 30 seconds?
I'm actually going to defer on this.
Okay,
this
okay,
case.
Colin, go ahead.
Yes, so as I think I alluded to, I think the key to success, certainly from our experience, and particularly in this region, is this whole notion of coming into the region and understanding strategic intent. Clearly you can read that, but until you actually become part of the fabric of aviation in this part of the world, it's very hard to really get that coalesced in your mind, and then equally hard to carry that back to the headquarters and articulate that clearly with passion. So as much as you can understand that with the appropriate players in that market space, because our philosophy on partnering PPP will be, we're not just looking at point solutions. If you're spending your time partnering for a point solution, it's very, very hard to create this partnership. So our view is, and I'd encourage anybody looking to do this, don't have a mindset of, I'm going to put it in place for this and I'm going to move on. Let's create a best-in-class capability that we can then use in other parts of the world and use that competitively. So that's kind of the insight, I would say, and just the way you think about these partnerships is key to making them sustainably successful.
Dr. Mogul. So to press that, Colin, applying this sort of philosophy across sectors, across manufacturing sectors, you think is very doable, and it's not germane just to the aerospace sector or some related sectors. It's across the realm.
I would imagine so. Obviously, we have the good fortune of being in an industry that kind of leads the world in technology and how we take that technology to other parts of the world other than some of the developed nations. So I could only assume that its portability to other markets is a very doable thing.
Thank you. Question or two from the audience? Over here, sir. Dr. Yahya.
Dr. Fahad Al-Damer from GCC. I would like to ask a question for Mr. Bell about the composite business and depends on the three elements. Very important elements is the continuity of raw material supply and of course the stability of the price and also the engineering mentality and change of it and the technical support. And what is your vision for your new joint venture in UAE to overcome these challenges?
In general, my view about where the composite materials value chain is heading is we're still moving up the steep part of the maturity curve. And there is a lot of opportunity yet, and that is generally for the last couple of decades, the industry has been led by higher and higher performance requirements out of the materials and the parts, and now the transition is to an industrialized supply and value chain. And I think that the opportunity we have here with working with Mubadala and Strata in the UAE, because it's a new business, because it has been put in place and grown, and I'm referring to Strata now, impressively quickly. Dr. Vogel talked earlier about pace and the importance of pace. That Strata has grown from greenfield to a tier 1 operation that performs at the level of the best in class around the world. And if we can put some of the other key elements of the value chain, composites value chain around that, the technology development, materials supply, we can really have a big step forward toward this industrialization of composites.
Dr. Mogul, go ahead.
Yeah, you raised a very good point, thank you. Composites is a very, very good example of an emerging technology because most of us engineers think in metallics. We design in metallics, and when we think about manufacturing, we think about metallics. And we haven't quite understood how to think composites in design and therefore develop the manufacturing methods accordingly. So in my opinion, there's a huge amount of innovation and growth in composites for the next 20, 30 years, including hybrids, metallics and composites joined together. That's going to be the order that plays. So automation in composites, a lot of the composites manufacturing routines are still black art. Quality assurance of composites, there's a huge amount of work to be done. Automation, foolproofing, designing and reducing costs. It's an unbelievably good area, and people who get into it now will have growth and opportunity for the next 2 or 3 decades at least. It's a fantastic area, really worth going into, because the world is only just learning how to make composites.
Ladies and gentlemen, our time is up. I want to invite you all to go to lunch, but first, I would like on behalf of the panelists to thank our Mubadala and the organizers of the Abu Dhabi Global Aerospace Summit. And if you wouldn't mind, please give our panelists a warm round of applause for their participation today.